They erased my name from the invitation, but not from what's rightfully mine. The screen glowed with sterile indifference. The email subject line casting a dull light across the granite counter. You are cordially invited to Charles Hale's 70th birthday celebration. No salutation, no Dear Victoria. Just a time, a date, and a location back in Waverly, the town I hadn't set foot in since the funeral. I stared at it, my finger hovering over the trackpad, heart beating slow and hard like a warning drum. The sun hadn't even broken the Boston skyline. Outside my penthouse window, the city stretched wide and quiet, bathed in the cold hue of early October. My apartment, all muted stone, and sharp corners felt colder than usual. I'd designed it that way. Clean lines, no clutter. Nothing soft. Nothing to hold on to. Still, there were mornings like this, when I wondered if I'd gone too far in stripping the warmth out of my world. This place didn't feel like home. It felt like armor. Last night, I dreamed of her again. My grandmother's hands combing through my hair, her voice a ghost in my ear. "You'll never be alone, Victoria." She used to say that when I was little, when I cried in the attic room, while the rest of the family toasted champagne downstairs without me. I blinked and reread the invitation, searching for something. Anything that might indicate this wasn't just another tactical gesture. But it was clinical. Efficient. As though I were a necessary obligation they couldn't quite exclude without looking suspicious. They'd excluded me from the group thread, of course. That was easy. They'd scrubbed my name from every family photo at the lake house. When grandmother died, no one called me, not even Izzy. I'd found out through a forwarded obituary. Not a single reply to my messages. My inbox was still full of them, all marked unread on their end. I checked again now. Still nothing. The cursor blinked at me. I could ignore it. I didn't have to go. I'd built a life without them, without their dinners, their judgments, their whispered criticisms, wrapped in faux concern. But something about that blank greeting, that omission of my name, struck a match in my chest. Not even the decency to pretend. I scrolled through my calendar and clicked open the flight search tab. Boston Logan to Savannah. Direct. 1 seat left on the 10:12 a.m. I stared at it for a moment longer than I should have. My throat was dry. This wasn't about nostalgia. This wasn't about closure. Not for them. For me. I booked the ticket. For a few seconds, I just sat there watching the confirmation email hit my inbox. My pulse finally started to settle. And then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I hit reply to a family email. No formalities, no emotion. I simply typed, "I'll be there." I pressed send before I could second guess it. My phone buzzed with the usual early work emails, but I ignored them. I stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window. Arms crossed. Boston was waking up, cars beginning to hum below, light cutting through the fog. But all I could see was Waverly. That house. The way Izzy used to stand at the top of the staircase and pretend I didn't exist. The way my mother adjusted silverware when I sat at the table, like I disrupted her symmetry just by existing. Fine. Let them pretend I was gone. If they want to pretend I'm gone, I'll make sure they never forget me instead. The house by the sea never judged me. That's why they hate it. I cradled my coffee cup between both hands, the ceramic cool from neglect. Outside, the golden wash of late afternoon filtered through the cafe windows, spilling over the worn mahogany table in front of me. Harvard Square pulsed softly with early evening bustle, but inside the cafe was a cocoon, quiet, with the distant hum of jazz playing through old speakers and the comforting scent of cinnamon and paper. Across from me sat a framed photo I hadn't looked at in years. It lived in the bottom of a storage drawer, packed away with old notebooks and ticket stubs from another life. Now I had set it gently against the napkin holder. The image was slightly faded, my grandmother standing behind me, one hand on my shoulder, the other, lifting a strand of my wind-blown hair as we smiled in front of Prescott House. The sea behind us had always looked like it was listening. Prescott was the only place I had ever felt safe. It was her house, technically, our house, she used to say, but the rest of them hated it, said it was too isolated, too cold, too old money. Really, they just hated what it represented. quiet strength legacy without manipulation, a piece of her that was never theirs to control. I turned the photo slightly and caught my reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, clenched jaw. A woman shaped by silence. Victoria. The voice was soft but firm, catching me off guard. I looked up. A man no older than 35 in a charcoal wool coat and navy scarf stood beside my table. His dark hair was neatly combed, glasses perched carefully on his nose. He had the posture of someone raised with discipline, but not arrogance. Something about his presence slowed the air. "Yes," I asked, cautiously. "I'm Frederick Whitmore. I worked with your grandmother, Margaret Prescott." I didn't respond at first. My heart thudded. Once, then stilled. He gestured politely. "May I sit?" I nodded slowly, pushing the photo aside and watching as he settled into the chair opposite mine. "I know this is unexpected." He began, hands folded on the table. "I wasn't sure how to contact you. I didn't think emailing the family would yield clarity." A bitter smile flickered at my lips. "You're right." He nodded, almost sadly. "I wanted to offer my condolences. I should have reached out sooner. After everything, I thought you might not want to be reminded." I studied him. His voice carried no performance, just steadiness, grief without theater. "She used to talk about you?" he continued. "Said you had her eyes?" I looked away, throat tight. I wasn't even told about the funeral until it was over. Frederick exhaled through his nose. "That doesn't surprise me." "Margaret, she wasn't unaware of how they treated you. He hesitated, then corrected himself. "Your family." I let the silence stretch. She was planning something, he said at last. Before her health declined. A separate trust. Personal. For you. I blinked, confused. "What do you mean, separate? Did you ever receive anything from her estate?" I shook my head. "No. Everything went to my parents and Izzy. The lawyers were clear about that. They even had Edmund Carlyle oversee it." His brow furrowed. "That's not what I remember from the last draft I saw. I wasn't her primary legal counsel, that was Carlyle. But she asked me to review a document, just before the stroke." He reached into the leather folio beside him and pulled out a creased, yellowing photocopy. He placed it gently on the table. It was an old trust draft, and there, typed in clean serif font, was my name, as sole heir to Prescott House. I leaned forward, pulse racing. The draft wasn't signed, but it was real. And it was dated a full 2 months before her stroke. "I found it while sorting archived files last week," he explained. "It was meant to be reviewed again, updated, and signed. But she didn't get the chance." He nodded. "They knew," I whispered, fingers trembling as I traced the faded letters of my name. "They must have seen this." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I looked up, and for the first time in years, felt something flicker inside me. Rage, yes, but also something quieter, something more dangerous. Hope. They'd taken everything, but maybe not everything. They erased me, but maybe not everything. They looked me up and down like I didn't belong. I smiled. They didn't know whose name was on the building. Maison Elise rose before me like a monument, limestone, iron, and quiet elegance. The sign above the entrance was subtle, almost austere, lit with warm backlighting that whispered prestige without shouting it. My heels clicked softly on the pavement as I passed beneath it. I didn't look up. I didn't have to. It was mine. They didn't know yet. Inside, candlelight flickered against etched glass and marble. The dining room buzzed with low conversation and clinking glasses. A host nodded and gestured to the private room at the back, a place usually reserved for ambassadors, CEOs, and the rare old money scion who still held sway in Boston. Tonight, it was my family. I arrived last. Intentionally. Their heads turned in unison, a well-rehearsed tableau of thin smiles and raised brows. Izzy was the first to break the silence. "You clean up?" "Okay," she said, tilting her head in mock admiration. Her diamond earrings sparkled with effort. I smiled nonchalantly, shedding my coat and draping it over my arm. "Good evening," I said, choosing a tone that was neither warm nor distant, just controlled. Eleanor barely looked up. "We thought you'd be too busy with your little consulting," she murmured, brushing non-existent lint off her silk blouse. Little. They always made it sound like I sold Avon door to door instead of advising major tech clients across 3 continents. I took the empty seat at the far end of the long mahogany table. The chair had been placed half a step off-center. I noticed. Of course I noticed. Charles raised his glass. A toast, he said, already mid-monologue. To family and to continuity. Everyone dutifully lifted their glasses. Izzy has agreed to oversee the Hale family investments moving forward. A natural fit, really. A ripple of polite applause circled the table. Izzy beamed. It just made sense. I've always had a knack for numbers. Harrison, our uncle on my father's side, smirked from across the table. And here I thought you were allergic to spreadsheets? She giggled. Only ugly ones. The table laughed. I sipped my wine. Then Harrison's eyes landed on me, glinting with something sour. Maison Elise, he said, lifting his menu and scanning it like it personally offended him. Bit pricey, isn't it? A pause. He leaned back, voice louder now. Can you even afford this place? Silence spread like ink in water. I met his gaze and smiled, not amused, not flustered, just still. I didn't answer, just lifted my glass again and drank slowly, letting the wine linger on my tongue. Charles cleared his throat, uncomfortable. We're just glad you made the time, Victoria. Oh, I wouldn't have missed it, I replied evenly. The courses arrived one by one, each plate more intricate than the last. The chatter continued around me, full of sideways glances and stories that rewrote our shared past. Eleanor went on about Izzy's upcoming trip to Milan. Harrison boasted about a condo deal in the Hamptons. No one asked about me. Not really. Not once. Halfway through the main course, I excused myself. Outside the private room, the atmosphere shifted. The maitre d', dressed immaculately in black, saw me approach and straightened. "Miss Hale?" he said with a slight bow, his voice respectful but discreet. "Everything is in order. Your private arrangements have been confirmed for next quarter's events. A couple of my relatives, distant cousins, maybe stood nearby in the lounge. I didn't acknowledge them, but they saw. They heard." I nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the dining room. Each step was measured, each breath controlled. I moved through the hallway like something inevitable, like a ghost they never buried properly. Secrets echo louder when whispered outside the ballroom. The rain had begun as a mist brushing across the windows of Maison Elise like a second layer of judgment. I stepped outside into the evening, the sharp scent of wet pavement rising to greet me. Street lamps threw long shadows on the stone walk, and the cold clung to my bare arms like fingers trying to pull me back inside. I exhaled slowly, every breath thick with the quiet chaos of that dinner. Izzy's practiced smugness, Charles' rehearsed announcements, Eleanor's elegant silence, it all hung on me like perfume I didn't choose to wear. The city moved around me, horns and footsteps muffled by the rain. It was late, but not quiet. Then I saw him. Frederick stood beneath the awning, by the valet stand coat collar, turned up an umbrella, dangling forgotten at his side. His gaze was steady, unreadable, a shadow among shadows. "You left before dessert," he said gently. "I wasn't hungry for anything they were serving," I replied, brushing a damp strand of hair from my cheek. He hesitated before stepping closer. "Can we talk?" I glanced around. The valet was helping someone into a black SUV. The lobby was empty. The world felt paused. "Let's walk," I said, gesturing to the edge of the building, where the street noise faded just enough to hear a whisper. We found a pocket of quiet by a side entrance, half hidden by hedges and the overhang of a terrace. The rain thickened. Frederick leaned slightly toward me. "There's something you need to know," he said. "Edmund Carlyle. He's hiding something." My jaw tightened at the name. Edmund had been my family's lawyer for as long as I could remember. Cold-clipped loyal to them. Frederick continued, "The last official version of your grandmother's will. It was never filed." "That's not possible," I said. "She was meticulous. Obsessive. Every year she updated her living trust, color-coded her files, handwrote memos. I know. That's what makes it so strange. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it to me. This is the inventory log submitted by Carlisle's office to the probate court. There's no mention of Prescott House. Not even a transfer record. Just gone. I stared at the page. It was pristine. Deceit always dressed well. Maybe she changed her mind, I offered too quickly. Frederick shook his head. She didn't. I saw her 2 months before she passed. She was making arrangements specifically for you. I folded the paper slowly, pressing the creases into it, like pressure might unlock truth. Why now, I asked. Why bring this to me tonight? Because I believe they moved fast after she died. And because Carlisle was once under quiet investigation for mishandling another estate. It never went to trial. No proof. But the pattern was there. I looked at him, searching for any flicker of self-interest, but all I found was unease, not recklessness. Conviction? Victoria, he said softly. I don't want to drag you into something if you're not ready. But I can't ignore what I'm seeing. A raindrop hit my cheek and slid down slowly. I didn't flinch. I thought of my grandmother's voice again. Never fight in front of people who want you to lose. So I'd waited. I'd built my walls high, my life higher. But walls weren't enough anymore. Let's make them nervous, I said. His eyes narrowed just slightly, a nod masked in stillness. We'll need discretion. Records, timelines, anything you have from your side. I have nothing from their side, I replied. But I remember everything they tried to erase. The silence between us grew dense with something unspoken momentum. I stepped away from the overhang, letting the rain hit me full on. It was cold and steady, and I welcomed it. They buried the truth. Let's dig. Sometimes what saves you isn't evidence. It's someone who remembers who you were. The bells above the door tinkled gently as I stepped into Maddie's bookshop. The air inside smelled like old paper and dried lavender, and it wrapped around me like a worn quilt. Warmth radiated from somewhere near the back, probably the little space heater she refused to replace. Dust danced in beams of afternoon light. The place looked exactly the same as it had since college. Maddie's voice floated over the shelves before I saw her. You're late. I smiled in spite of myself. You don't even know what time I was coming. She emerged from behind a stack of newly arrived hardcovers. Her reading glasses perched crookedly on her nose, a pen tucked into the messy knot of hair on her head. I know you, she said, simply pulling me into a brief hug. Her touch was light, but grounding. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until that moment. She stepped back and looked at me, really looked past the coat, the heels, the polished mask I'd grown used to wearing. You've lost weight, she said. I've lost patience, I replied. That weighs more. Maddie led me to the reading nook at the back. Worn armchairs, a chipped side table, and a mismatched teapot she insisted made the best Earl Grey in Cambridge. We sat, and for a moment I just listened to the soft ticking of the wall clock, to the hum of the radiator, to the space that didn't demand I prove myself. I got an invitation, I finally said. To my father's birthday? She raised an eyebrow. It didn't even have my name on it. Just the time and place. No Victoria. No warmth. Nothing. Maddie poured the tea, not interrupting. She had always been good at leaving space for people to find their words. I went, I said, and they were just as awful as I remembered. Worse even. Izzy's getting the family investment portfolio. My mother barely looked at me. My uncle asked if I could afford the restaurant. I let out a short laugh, bitter and sharp. I own the damn building. Her mouth twitched. Did you tell them? No. Not yet, but they'll find out. She nodded, setting down her cup. And why are you really here? I hesitated, then reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the copy Frederick had given me. Something's wrong with Margaret's will. Frederick, he was her paralegal, thinks the final version, naming me as heir to Prescott House, was buried, suppressed, maybe even replaced. Maddie's gaze sharpened. That house was hers, and she loved you more than any of them. I don't have any proof, I admitted. Only a photocopy of a draft. No signature, nothing official. Maddie leaned back, thinking. Then she stood up and disappeared into the back room. I heard rustling drawers opening, paper shifting. When she returned, she held something small in her hand. A seashell. I stared at it. It was pale pink, ridged, slightly chipped. I remembered it. She gave this to me before I left for Boston, I said quietly. You left it here during finals? Maddie replied. I kept it. I turned it over in my palm. On the inside, faint ink had bled into the grooves for the storms ahead. She knew, I whispered. Maddie sat beside me again, then said, Victoria, do you remember that summer? I helped Margaret organize the sitting room at Prescott, the one with the big oak drawers. I nodded slowly. You alphabetized her newspaper clippings. She hated it. She also asked me to help her lock up a drawer in her writing desk. She told me, this is only for Victoria. If something ever happens, she'll know where to look. My breath caught. I thought maybe it was sentimental. Maddie continued. But then I found this tucked inside a book last week. She handed me a folded paper, aged but intact. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, looping slightly slanted, for the one with my name. I stared at it for a long time. There was no date, no context. Just that one line. It didn't need explanation. I haven't been back since the funeral, I said. I know, Maddie replied gently. I stood slowly clutching the note and the shell. I could feel something shift inside me. Not anger, not vengeance. Resolve. I'm going home, I said. She didn't ask which home. She didn't need to. The real one. The bells rang again as I left, but I didn't turn back. My heels struck the pavement with purpose. My eyes weren't on the bookstore, or the street, or even the weekend ahead. They were fixed on the shoreline on Prescott. Note in hand. Storm ahead. I was ready. The air still smelled like salt and secrets. I stepped out of the car and into the briny wind that whipped in from the Atlantic, my coat billowing behind me as if trying to hold me back. Prescott House loomed at the edge of the bluffs, weathered, but proud, its white clapboard siding streaked with time and storms. The seagulls circled above, crying like they remembered something I didn't. I hadn't seen it since the funeral. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward the porch, heart pounding like I was 12 again, afraid of waking ghosts. The brass key Maddie had pressed into my palm weighed more than it should. I unlocked the door, the old bolt resisting, before giving way with a groan. The scent of cedar and dust rushed out, followed by silence. Thick, knowing silence. I crossed the threshold and stood still. Everything was just as we left it. Drapes drawn halfway, an umbrella in the stand, the air heavy with disuse. A place frozen in time, waiting for the right person to thaw it. I wandered the house slowly, room by room. The study was first. Margaret's leather chair, worn at the edges, a thin film of dust on the surface of her mahogany desk. I ran a finger across the top and left a trail like a signature. Books still lined the shelves, their spines faded, a few stacked horizontally, like she used to do when something needed revisiting. In the piano room, sunlight filtered through stained glass. I pressed one ivory key. The note rang out hollow and lonely. The attic smelled of mothballs and memories. Old trunks sat like sleeping beasts, and I didn't dare open them yet. But it was Margaret's bedroom that stopped me. The air shifted there warmer somehow. Her quilt still lay neatly folded at the foot of the bed. I walked to the old vanity and opened its top drawer. Empty. Odd. I knew she'd kept keepsakes there. Hairpins, scraps of poetry, an old watch I once gave her. The drawer looked normal, but something wasn't right. I stood still and listened. Then I remembered. Age 12. A storm raging outside. Margaret's voice calm but urgent. This house keeps things safe. If you ever need to hide something, try under the floorboard near the closet. We'd laughed, but I did it anyway. Tucked away a note about the first time Izzy made me cry. It stayed there for years. I walked to the closet, dropped to my knees, and began tapping the floor. It only took a moment. Near the back corner, I found the loose board. Same soft gyve beneath the varnished pine. I pried it up gently, breath-catching. Beneath it, wrapped in wax paper and tied with red thread, was a sealed envelope. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. On the outside, in Margaret's looping script, just in case they come for you. My chest tightened. I opened it. Inside was a small USB drive, matte black, labeled with a white sticker WP, and folded beside it a brief note. They may try to rewrite everything, but not what I left here. You'll know what to do when the time comes. My throat went dry. I turned the note over, no date, no signature. Just her handwriting, firm, deliberate. I clutched the USB like it might vanish. There were no clues as to what was on it, but I knew one thing: Margaret had hidden this for me. Not for Charles, not for Eleanor, certainly not for Izzy. A storm rumbled outside, low and long, shaking the window panes. I walked back to the center of the room and looked around every corner, humming with her absence. "What did you know, Grandma?" I whispered. Another thunderclap echoed in answer, and in the stillness that followed, I realized I wasn't just reclaiming a house. I was stepping into a war. Sometimes the first blow is just a whisper in the right ear. Julia was already seated when I arrived. She wore a navy blazer over a charcoal turtleneck, her hair in its usual low bun, tapping the rim of her coffee cup with a teaspoon, as if stirring thoughts, not cream. The private cafe off Newbury Street was mostly empty this early in the week, exactly what I needed. "Victoria Hale," she said with a half smile. "You're a hard woman to pin down." I slid into the seat across from her, letting the warm scent of espresso settle the tension that had been riding my shoulders since I left Prescott House. "Sorry," I said. "Boston has changed. Or maybe I have." She raised an eyebrow. "Well, I heard rumors, but I figured they were just that. Rumors." I gave a non-committal smile and sipped my drink. This wasn't about catching up. It was reconnaissance, diplomatic, and quiet. The kind of conversation where nothing is said directly, but everything lands anyway. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy," I said. "What people leave behind, and who gets to control the story." Julia leaned forward slightly, interest peaked. "Anyone in particular sparking that thought?" I tilted my head. "My grandmother passed a while back. Margaret Hale." She blinked. "Prescott House. Margaret." I nodded. She was meticulous with her estate, or so I thought. "But I've been noticing some inconsistencies." Julia set her cup down carefully. "Inconsistencies. That's the polite word," I said, smiling without warmth. "She told me once, months before she died, that she had plans in place, that she wanted me to have certain things. And you didn't." "Not officially?" I paused. "But unofficially, I've found things that suggest a different intent." Julia's journalistic instincts flared behind her calm expression. How different. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I didn't slide it across the table, just let it rest between us, visible, but untouched. Let's just say it's an old draft. One the family conveniently forgot existed. One that names me, not my parents or my sister, as primary heir to Prescott House. Her fingers hovered over the envelope, then pulled back. "And you're telling me this because—" I shrugged. "Because you're smart and discreet. And I trust you'll know what to do if and when this becomes relevant." She looked at the envelope again, then at me. "Victoria, you do realize what this could mean, right? If it's real, I'm not asking you to publish anything," I said softly. "Just keep your ears open. Some stories write themselves when the right questions get asked." She exhaled slowly. "You're threading a needle here. People like your family, especially the ones who've been in control for decades, they don't take kindly to disruption." I smiled. "Good. I'm not here to be kind." A soft buzz in my coat pocket. I ignored it. Julia finally reached for the envelope, her fingers brushing the flap like it might bite. "I'll look," she said, quietly. I nodded. That's all I need. We parted with no hug, no lingering goodbye. Just a shared look, her skeptical mind resolute. Outside, the wind had picked up. Boston always had a way of making you feel like you were standing on the edge of something fall or flight. I walked slowly, letting my thoughts untangle with each step. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sky was bruised with dusk. I took off my coat, lit a candle, and finally checked my phone. One text from Julia. If even half of this is true, you're about to ruin someone's legacy. I stared at the words, my pulse steady. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, but a quiet confirmation. The first thread had been pulled. Then another notification popped up. Edmund Carlisle has updated his LinkedIn profile, retired. I stared at the screen. So, they knew. And if they thought I'd stop at a whisper, they hadn't heard me scream yet. They built their fortress with paper. I just found the match. Frederick's office buzzed with a quiet sort of tension, muted footsteps, the rhythmic click of Dana's keyboard, and the hum of a coffee machine that no one seemed to touch. It was modern, all clean lines and logic, with no trace of the dusty prestige my family worshipped. No portraits of founding partners, no polished plaques touting a century of litigation, just light. And a single, locked drawer behind Frederick's desk, the only secret in a room built for clarity. I sat with my palms on my knees, staring at the screen as Frederick opened the folder from the USB. The audio files are intact, he said without looking at me. Same with the scanned documents. Nothing's corrupted. The screen blinked. A list appeared. PDFs, Word docs, MP3s. I saw the file names. Some were labeled plainly, Draft Will 1 letters, 2020 voice memo, August. Others were cryptic. WP stood out. Play that one first, I said. Frederick clicked. Margaret's voice filled the room. Clear, measured, haunting. If Victoria is not in the final filing, she said, then it was forged. I don't care who tells you otherwise. You'll know the truth when you hear it, and you'll know what to do. I pressed a fist against my lips. I didn't cry, but I needed to. There was no warmth in that voice, only steel wrapped in love. The kind of love that endures even after death and braces for betrayal. Frederick paused the audio. Do you hear that it's not casual? That's a recorded statement with legal implications. She meant it to be used. And I will, I said. He turned the monitor toward me and opened the scanned documents. Here, these are drafts of her estate plan. Look at this one from February. She names you primary heir to Prescott House. The language is clear. Then in June, you're gone. She died in July. Yes? I looked at the dates again, willing them to blur, but they didn't. So somewhere between February and July, someone got to her. Or to Edmund. That's the theory, Frederick said carefully. We can't prove forgery yet, but these files give us enough grounds to challenge the existing probate, especially with the memo. What do we do? He pulled out a printed form from a folder marked Petition for Probate Review. His handwriting lined the margins in blue ink. We file this. We cite newly uncovered documentation and request a full audit of Edmund's submissions. If we're lucky, a judge will freeze any asset transfers tied to Margaret's will until it's resolved. I nodded. And if we're not lucky, we still make them nervous. Dana entered quietly and handed Frederick a sealed envelope. Scanned, backed up, and encrypted, she said. Copies uploaded to our secure vault. He passed the envelope to me. Your copy. I took it with both hands. The paper was warm. He walked over to his computer and pulled up an email. His expression shifted, his jaw clenched as he read. Problem, I asked. Harrison just responded. He turned the screen so I could read, Your client's actions are edging into defamation. I strongly advise you to withdraw this challenge before it escalates. This is your only warning. I read it twice then, once more. Escalates. Frederick shrugged. Typical threat language. He's rattled. I leaned back. They were never afraid of me before. Just disappointed. They should be afraid now, he said. There was a pause. Then Frederick hit send. The formal petition joined the digital queue of thousands in the courthouse system, but we both knew this one would send ripples. Court of public opinion, I asked, echoing something he once said. He smirked. It starts here. But if you want it louder, that's Julia's domain. Already working on that, I said. We stood together by the window, watching Boston rush by below. People in suits, tourists with umbrellas, taxis, beeping like a metronome. None of them knew that a single filing just cracked the illusion of the Hale family's perfect estate. I'll get pushback, Frederick said. So will you. I'm counting on it. He handed me a flash drive. This has the audio files in case they try to scrub anything. Don't upload it. Just keep it close. I slipped it into my coat pocket. That night back in my apartment, I poured a drink and stared at the blinking lights outside. I hadn't even taken off my boots when my phone buzzed. Unknown caller. But the number? It was familiar. I didn't answer. The voicemail came seconds later. I hit play on speaker. My mother's voice crackled through. Smooth, cold, controlled. What have you done, Victoria? No greeting. No pause. No remorse. Just accusation. Just fear. I poured the drink down the sink. No need for ceremony. The fight had finally begun. When cornered snakes bite, but they also reveal where they've been hiding. The morning light slanted through the tall windows of my apartment, washing the marble kitchen island in a pale gold that felt ironic against the storm behind my eyes. I hadn't slept. My phone buzzed once, then again, and again. Each notification landed like a drop of acid on my nerves. I opened the article with shaking hands. Disinherited. Heiress challenges. Hale family trust. Bitter feud among Boston elite. They used my old college photo, the one from a scholarship gala where I wore borrowed pearls, and a smile that didn't know better. The article quoted anonymous sources close to the family, suggesting I'd always struggled emotionally, that I had never quite adjusted to the pressures of high society, that perhaps grief had clouded my judgment. I didn't need a byline to know Charles orchestrated it. The tone was his, calculated, precise, deadly. The next blow came by noon. An email cold and final. Due to recent developments in the press, we've decided to suspend our contract until further notice. The consulting firm I had given 2 years of my life to turn silent in a single sentence. I stared at the screen blinking as if that might erase it. But the silence that followed was louder than any noise. Frederick called his voice low and calm, trying to explain that this kind of retaliation was expected, that we had prepared for it, that the truth was still on our side. But even truth felt small when the world treated you like a lie. I shut my laptop, walked to the bathroom, and there, under the fluorescent light, I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back was pale, her eyes rimmed with the kind of weariness that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from being questioned, erased over and over until you almost believe them. Almost. I sat on the cold tile floor, my back against the wall, and suddenly I was 8 years old again. Hearing Charles say, "She's too sensitive. She'll never make it in the real world." I remembered the night he told me during a dinner party that my greatest contribution to the family would be knowing when to stay out of the way. "Never be more than a burden," he said with a glass of scotch in hand and a smile for the guests. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt. The phone buzzed again, vibrating on the countertop like a heart trying to stay alive. Maddie's name lit the screen. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Her voice was sunlight. "Hey, Jules, I saw the article." "Breathe, okay?" "I'm not okay," I whispered. "They're winning." "No," she said softly. "They're scared." I stayed quiet. "You're not doing this for revenge," she reminded me. "You're doing it because you deserve to be seen, to exist fully. That matters." I closed my eyes and clutched the phone tighter. Her words were like a life raft. Not dramatic, just enough to keep me afloat. After we hung up, I lay on the couch for a long time, watching the ceiling, feeling the weight of shame, fear, and something else. Something rising through the cracks of despair. Resolve. They wanted me humiliated. I'll give them terrified. I sat up. My hand reached for the laptop again, steadier now. I opened a new document, each click of the keyboard an act of defiance, and as the screen came to life, I began drafting the first lines. She opens her laptop, begins preparing a press release. She died months ago, and yet she just spoke louder than all of them. The storm outside rattled the windows like a warning. Wind curled through the seams of the glass, brushing the back of my neck as I stood in Frederick's home office, damp from the walk up the drive. He hadn't offered coffee this time. He didn't need to. The folder on the desk had already shifted the temperature in the room. I stepped closer, drawn not by curiosity, but gravity. He looked up at me, eyes steady. I found something Margaret didn't want them to see. The folder was labeled Prescott Legacy, in her handwriting, bold, looping letters that stopped me cold. My breath caught before I even touched the paper. Frederick slid it open with the same care I imagined a surgeon used on exposed bone. Inside a set of notarized documents. Thick pages stamped, signed, and dated. I scanned them once. Then again. They weren't drafts. They weren't copies. These were the real thing. Property deeds, asset transfers, every one of them, clean, airtight, legal. And all of them bearing my name. I heard myself say, "This can't be right." "It is," Frederick replied. "Margaret transferred Prescott House and several holdings directly to you, not to the Hale Family Trust, not to Charles or Eleanor, to you." I stared at her signature, strong, assertive, familiar. And beside it, mine. She had done this while I was still clinging to the edges of the family like a shadow. All the while, she had been preparing. Quietly. Intentionally. "The date on this?" I whispered, tracing the top of the page. It was 3 weeks before she was hospitalized. She knew, Frederick said. She knew what they'd try. My hands went cold as he reached for a flash drive and inserted it into the laptop. One folder opened immediately. Prescott Legacy. Nested inside were PDFs, voice memos, and one final file, an audio message. "She left this," he said, and encrypted it. Only unlocked when I opened the Prescott folder with the original key. The screen was black except for a timestamp 9 days before her death. No file name. No embellishment. He pressed play. Static buzzed softly at first. Then came the sound of her breath, uneven, as if she'd waited too long to speak. And then her voice weathered, but unmistakably hers. "If you're hearing this, they've already made their move. I told Edmund I wanted Victoria to have what's hers. And if you're still fighting, it means he didn't listen. Or someone made him forget. Victoria, sweetheart. I knew they'd come for it. But I've always trusted you'd find your way back. You have what they never will, clarity. Integrity. The truth. Don't let their noise drown your voice." Her voice wavered, then steadied. "I chose you for a reason." The audio clicked off with a final breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding mine. I blinked, then blinked again. Frederick didn't speak. He didn't have to. On the side of the room, the screen lit up with a soft chime. Maddie patched in from her bookstore. She'd been watching, listening. I could see the glint of tears along her lashes. "She recorded that for you," Maddie said, voice barely above a whisper. "She knew everything. And she still chose you." I nodded, slowly trying to find words beneath the thunder rolling in the distance. My chest was full. Rage, grief, disbelief, and something I hadn't felt in years, validation. She left this house to me. The land, the rights, all of it. I said aloud, almost testing the sentence in the air. And they still pretended I was never even there. Frederick leaned back in his chair. "With this, you don't just have a case anymore, Victoria. You have leverage. It wasn't just about property or legal documents now. It was about memory, about legacy, about a woman who saw me even when I couldn't see myself, and who had built a quiet trap for the people who once fed on silence." I stood up. The room felt warmer somehow, like Margaret had lit a fire somewhere deep within its walls. I looked between them, my voice calm. Time to remind them who I am. Outside, lightning strikes. She doesn't flinch. They expected silence. I arrived with thunder. The glass walls of the arbitration firm shimmered with artificial calm, but I could feel the storm inside me press against my ribs like a tide waiting to rise. The receptionist didn't meet my eye, just motioned toward the long hallway lined with oil paintings and quiet judgments. The further I walked, the more the walls seemed to narrow. Frederick's footsteps fell in sync beside me, measured, certain. A silent oath that whatever happened in that room, I would not face it alone. We reached the conference room. The door was already ajar. And inside my family, Charles sat at the head of the table like a king awaiting tribute. Arms crossed, legs spread, his suit immaculate. Eleanor beside him, rigid and pale, her fingers ghosting over the rim of her coffee cup as if it were the only thing tethering her. Izzy slouched, scrolling through her phone like this was a dinner party she'd rather skip. Harrison stood by the blinds, hands in pockets, gaze tracking us with the vague unease of a man who knows secrets don't stay buried forever. Their surprise was subtle, but it was there. Charles's brow flicked upward. Izzy paused mid-scroll. Eleanor straightened half an inch. I took my seat slowly, folding my coat over the back of the chair, calm as still water. The two estate board members were seated across from us, neutral-faced and silent. Frederick opened his briefcase with a practiced ease. Papers stacked in precise order. A laptop, a portable speaker. His voice was low, but firm. "We are here to address inconsistencies in the execution of Margaret Prescott's estate," he began. "Namely, the disappearance of original documents, the failure to file the last will draft, and potential misconduct involving Edmund Carlisle." Charles snorted. "This is laughable. We've already gone through probate. Everything was done by the book. She's just bitter she wasn't included." Frederick didn't flinch. "Victoria Hale is the granddaughter and direct descendant of Margaret Prescott. She was in fact named sole heir in multiple drafts of the estate plan, one of which you will now hear." He connected the USB. The screen flickered. Margaret's voice poured into the room, warm, slow, steady, like ocean wind. My name fell from her lips with clarity no lawyer could rewrite. She spoke of the house, of the legacy of her fear that after her death, the truth might not survive. "If Victoria is not listed," she said gently, "then something has been changed. I leave this record so she knows she was always the one." The silence after was deafening. Izzy leaned forward, voice hushed and panicked. "That's not real!" Frederick laid out the notarized deed to Prescott House. Fully executed, transferred before death, legally binding. Charles's hands twitched. He laughed, but it was hollow. "Anyone can fake a file. A voice. Then let the board authenticate," Frederick said coolly. "And if proven real, we're not just talking estate fraud. We're talking criminal alteration." A board member cleared his throat. "If this is accurate, then yes, the estate has been misrepresented. We would need to recommend full probate reevaluation and possible legal action against any parties who knowingly submitted false documentation." Harrison's shoulders stiffened. Charles stood abruptly, knocking his chair. "We did what we had to." He stopped. Too late. Everyone turned to look at him. The weight of that sentence dropped like iron onto the table. No one moved, not even Izzy. Eleanor's lips parted, but nothing came out. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. I simply let the room breathe in the consequence of truth. Margaret once told me, "You don't need to scream when you're right. Just open the door and let the truth walk in." So I did. The louder they screamed, the clearer the truth became. The conference room had taken on a different tone since yesterday. Though the glass walls remained as transparent, the energy inside had shifted heavier, brittle. Outside, the low hum of press whispers pierced the sterile quiet of the Boston legal firm. A swarm of journalists pressing their cameras and microphones against the glass like moths to a flame. Victoria didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Today wasn't for them. Today was for Margaret. Frederick opened his sleek black folder with surgical precision. Across the table, Charles straightened his cuffs like a man preparing for war. Eleanor sat beside him, a pearl necklace tight around her neck, the kind of elegance that was meant to strangle rather than adorn. Izzy scrolled mindlessly through her phone, avoiding eye contact, and Harrison drummed 2 fingers on the table with the cadence of someone trying to stay one step ahead of a game he'd already lost. Frederick's voice cut through the tension. "We'd like to revisit the timeline of the will filings." No one responded, but no one stopped him. He laid out the first page, a scanned PDF from the digital contents of Margaret's drive. This was the draft submitted by Edmund Carlisle to the Hale family's legal registry, filed January 4th, 11:03 a.m. Charles smirked, and Frederick placed another paper beside it. This is a time-stamped internal memo from Edmund's assistant dated January 5th, 9th, 15 a.m. It refers to a revision of the document already submitted. The only problem, he tapped his pen sharply against the top line of the memo. Margaret Prescott died on January 2nd. Silence. Outside, a few camera flashes ignited. Eleanor paled. "No, that can't. It gets worse," Frederick said unbothered. The metadata confirms that a change to the heir designation line occurred after the will was scanned, which means the document was not only tampered with, but submitted fraudulently. A soft gasp escaped from the estate board chair. "This is serious." Izzy's voice cracked. "You said she'd never find out," she turned to Harrison. Her hands clenched. "I told them not to do it," Eleanor blurted suddenly. Her voice was high, trembling. "I said it would catch up." But no, Charles thought he could bury it all. Charles rose from his seat. "This is all circumstantial. You want to base an entire legal hearing on a timestamp and a theory?" Frederick opened the final folder. "We also have an audio file." He connected a small speaker, and the room fell into taut, rigid stillness. Margaret's voice, warm and gravel-edged with age, filled the room. "If Victoria isn't named in the official documents, then what they submitted is a lie. I've put everything where it can't be corrupted. Because they'll try. Believe me, they'll try." The last words lingered like fog. Victoria said nothing. She didn't need to. They were doing it for her. Izzy stood up abruptly. "This is a joke. This whole thing." "Sit down," Eleanor said, not looking at her daughter. Another board member leaned forward, tapping his notepad. "Given this new evidence, the arbitration cannot resolve this internally. This requires a full court proceeding. There's sufficient cause for fraud." The sound of that word fraud echoed like a gavel. Charles looked at Victoria, his eyes hollow now, the smirk gone. "We did what we had to." He started, then stopped. Too late. Frederick met his gaze coolly. "That's now on the record." Across the table, Izzy's face was mottled red. Eleanor turned away completely. Harrison slumped slightly, as if the room had taken 10 pounds off his spine. Victoria remained composed, back straight, gaze forward. Let them self-destruct. She had learned long ago that the most devastating truths didn't have to be shouted, they just had to be undeniable. Her phone buzzed in her lap. She glanced at the screen. Julia Chen, Boston Times, wants to interview the disinherited heiress who returned. She allowed herself the faintest smile. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered with perfect timing. The headlines hit like slow bombs across every screen in the city. My name, once buried under years of erasure and dismissal, was now inked in bold across the top of financial columns and social feeds. Victoria Hale exposes family fraud. I stared at it without blinking. I had expected this, dreamed of it, but living it. That was something else entirely. There was no joy, not really, just a quiet sense of reclamation. I wasn't celebrating. I was remembering. Every slight, every insult, every family gathering where my name wasn't spoken, only tolerated. Charles was the first to fall. By midday, he'd stepped down from 3 major boards, and Hale Capital had scrubbed his profile from the executive page. No press conference, no rebuttal, just an uncomfortable silence that reeked of panic. I watched the news footage of him storming out of his office, shielding his face from the cameras with the same hand that once silenced mine. A hand that used to slam down against dining tables when I dared question, that waved me off like a nuisance, that never once offered comfort when I needed a father. Now, it was the hand of a man running from a name he could no longer control. Eleanor left me a voicemail. Her voice trembled, stripped of its usual polish. "I never meant for this to happen. I hope you understand." I played it once, then again. On the third listen, I deleted it. Understanding was something they had never offered me, not even when I was a child, clinging to Margaret's hand at family gatherings where I was treated like a guest, not a daughter. Forgiveness isn't born from pity. It's built from truth. And for the first time, the truth had their names on it, not mine. Izzy's implosion came next. Julia forwarded me a photo from the gossip sites. Izzy sobbing outside Gavin's building, mascara streaking down her cheeks like war paint melted by truth. He'd dumped her within 24 hours. Not out of justice, but image preservation. I can't be tied to a scandal, he'd reportedly told colleagues. I imagined her alone in the condo she once paraded as a symbol of superiority. I didn't feel smug, only sad. Because even at her worst, she still believed the world owed her something, validation, control, applause. And now, for the first time, the applause had stopped. Maddie, ever the quiet force, sent me a bouquet of wildflowers with a note that read, "I always knew you'd turn their storm into your sky." I didn't cry, but something inside me exhaled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to defend who I was. She knew the versions of me even I had forgotten. She knew the girl who used to draw constellations in the dust on her grandmother's windowsill, the one who believed that silence was survival. Maddie reminded me that silence is sometimes the beginning of thunder. The Women in Legacy Foundation emailed me next. They wanted me to deliver the keynote at their annual conference. "Your story has inspired our members, your strength, your grace under siege." I said yes before I even finished reading. Not for recognition, but because Margaret once told me, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you prove you earned. And I had earned every bruise, every breath, every step that led me back into the room they once banished me from. I would speak not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as someone who rewrote the terms of her inheritance. That night, I drove to Prescott Cemetery. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the headstones. I walked alone to Margaret's grave, the sea air thick with memory. I knelt beside her, pulled out the golden coin she gave me the day I turned 13, and placed it on the marble. "They know now," I whispered. "And I can finally breathe." The wind curled around me like her old shawl, the one that smelled of lavender and sea salt. I let the silence stretch. It didn't hurt anymore. It healed. Just as I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. Julia again. Her voice was quick-clipped. "Victoria," she said, "you'll want to see this. Izzy just made a move, something you're not going to like." I didn't flinch. The house might have collapsed, but apparently some snakes still knew how to slither through the wreckage. Whatever came next, I was ready. I had built something they could never touch, a voice, a truth, in a future that didn't need their name to survive. The courtroom was cold, but my hands were steady. Frederick sat beside me, his pen poised, though he had nothing left to write. Across the aisle, no one from my family showed up. Not even Harrison. The judge entered with a rustle of robes, and the hush that followed felt ceremonial final. Her voice was firm as she delivered the verdict. "The original will of Margaret Prescott is hereby reinstated. All previously filed documents are to be considered null." I didn't exhale until she said my name. Victoria Hale, rightful heir. Just like that, it was over. Years of silence, dismissal, being overlooked, done. Outside, the air hit warmer than I expected. Spring was teasing Boston, and for once, I let it in. Frederick patted my shoulder and left to file the official paperwork. I didn't follow. I just stood there, letting the sun find my face. My phone buzzed. Maddie. Her baby shower was tomorrow, and she wanted to know if I'd bring the same lavender shortbread I made back in college. I smiled. Funny how something so small could still matter after everything. I told her yes, I'd bake 2 batches. That afternoon, I returned to my new office. Not the sterile firm where I used to keep my head down, but a space with windows that overlooked the Charles River. The walls were still bare, but the desk held fresh orchids from Maddie in a leather-bound planner embossed with my name. Hale Strategies. Founder. I touched the name and didn't recoil. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the weight it carried. I wasn't hiding. I was claiming. Later, Maddie and I walked along the beach in Marblehead, her belly rounding under a loose sweater, her laughter light and bright like wind chimes. We talked about baby names, about chocolate cravings, about anything but courtrooms and wills. She asked me if I felt different now. I told her yes, but it wasn't the victory that changed me. It was the process of reclaiming, the refusal to disappear. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I remembered sitting here years ago with Margaret. She was teaching me chess with a travel board. Always wait before sacrificing your queen, she had said. Back then, I thought she meant strategy. Now I knew she meant survival. She taught me not to hand myself over too quickly, not even in love or loyalty. Frederick called me the next morning. The deed was ready. I met him at the registrar, signed the final document, and saw the words printed in black ink, Victoria Hale, sole heir of Margaret Prescott. No trumpets, no audience, just silence and a pen. And yet, it felt like Margaret was right there behind me, nodding. That night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine, looking out at the city that once felt too big for me. I had no need to prove anything anymore. The truth had spoken. Justice, as Margaret once said, doesn't feel good. It feels done. And she was right. The ache didn't vanish, but the weight shifted. My spine stood straighter. Then came the envelope, ivory paper, gold foil hand-addressed. The return address was blank, but I knew that handwriting. It was Eleanor's. I opened it slowly, the way you open old wounds. Inside a formal invitation, you are cordially invited to a memorial gathering in honor of Margaret Prescott. The location, Prescott House. My house now. I read it twice, laughed once, soft, bitter, almost fond. They were coming back to the place they tried to steal, hoping I'd open the door. And I would, but not for them, for Margaret, for closure. I folded the letter and set it beside my planner. The game had changed. This time, I'd be the one choosing who got to stay. They used to mock my name. Now it's carved in stone. I stood before the newly restored Prescott House on a radiant summer afternoon, a gentle breeze stirring the ivy along its brick facade. The brass plaque above the heavy oak door shimmered in the sunlight, engraved with my name in stately letters. I had spent years denied, erased, and ridiculed, every whispered dismissal echoing in the silence of long-forgotten family corridors. But now, as I prepared to host a charity event in honor of my late grandmother, Margaret Prescott, the house itself bore witness to my defiance. Inside, the grand hall had been transformed. Soft lights, elegant arrangements of fresh flowers, and tables adorned with handwritten place cards set the tone for an evening meant not just for remembrance, but for reclamation. I had invited new allies, people who believed in integrity, who knew the value of truth, along with a few remorseful members of the old guard. Even Maddie was there, her gentle smile and steadfast presence, a constant reassurance, while Frederick's quiet nod from the back reminded me that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. Throughout the evening, murmurs of admiration and subtle glances of regret from those who once played a part in my erasure drifted through the crowd. At one point, as the first course was served, I stepped outside briefly to take in the golden light. The sight of that brass plaque bearing my name so boldly stirred in me a profound realization. The very symbol of all I had been denied was now a testament to my persistence. I recalled the first line of my journey. They didn't invite me out of love. And now, as I stood there, it was clear I was the one who chose who would enter this space. Inside, the atmosphere grew solemn when Eleanor finally arrived, her eyes wide and uncertain. In a trembling whisper that barely carried over the soft strains of a live string quartet, she murmured, "She would have been proud." I met her gaze calmly and replied, "She was. She told me herself." The words resonated not just with me, but with several others present. As glasses were raised in a toast, quiet tears began to streak down the faces of a few of our old family members, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and acknowledgement of past wrongs. At the close of the event, as laughter and gentle conversations mingled with the soft sound of the surf in the distance, I stepped onto the porch. The cool evening air wrapped around me, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the house and the legacy it carried truly mine. Every stone, every carved letter on the door spoke of battles, fought silently, of quiet courage born from years of being undervalued. I stood there solid and unyielding, my eyes fixed on the horizon. knowing that I had reclaimed not only a property, but the very respect and identity that had been stolen from me. Just then, as if to punctuate the moment, a young girl approached and asked in an innocent yet probing tone, "Ms. Hale, how did you know when to fight back?" I paused, a small, serene smile curving my lips. When I had nothing left to lose, I replied, my words echoing like a soft declaration in the cooling air. "They used to mock my name. Now it's carved in stone." I stood before the newly restored Prescott House on a radiant summer afternoon, a gentle breeze stirring the ivy along its brick facade. The brass plaque above the heavy oak door shimmered in the sunlight, engraved with my name in stately letters. I had spent years denied, erased, and ridiculed, every whispered dismissal echoing in the silence of long-forgotten family corridors. But now, as I prepared to host a charity event in honor of my late grandmother, Margaret Prescott, the house itself bore witness to my defiance. Inside, the grand hall had been transformed. Soft lights, elegant arrangements of fresh flowers, and tables adorned with handwritten place cards set the tone for an evening meant not just for remembrance, but for reclamation. I had invited new allies. People who believed in integrity, who knew the value of truth, along with a few remorseful members of the old guard. Even Maddie was there, her gentle smile and steadfast presence, a constant reassurance, while Frederick's quiet nod from the back reminded me that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. Throughout the evening, murmurs of admiration and subtle glances of regret from those who once played a part in my erasure drifted through the crowd. At one point, as the first course was served, I stepped outside briefly to take in the golden light. The sight of that brass plaque bearing my name so boldly stirred in me a profound realization. The very symbol of all I had been denied was now a testament to my persistence. I recalled the first line of my journey, "They didn't invite me out of love." And now, as I stood there, it was clear I was the one who chose who would enter this space. Inside, the atmosphere grew solemn when Eleanor finally arrived, her eyes wide and uncertain. In a trembling whisper that barely carried over the soft strains of a live string quartet, she murmured, "She would have been proud." I met her gaze calmly and replied, "She was. She told me herself." The words resonated not just with me, but with several others present. As glasses were raised in a toast, quiet tears began to streak down the faces of a few of our old family members, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and acknowledgement of past wrongs. At the close of the event, as laughter and gentle conversations mingled with the soft sound of the surf in the distance, I stepped onto the porch. The cool evening air wrapped around me, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the house and the legacy it carried, truly mine. Every stone, every carved letter on the door spoke of battles fought silently, of quiet courage born from years of being undervalued. I stood there, solid and unyielding, my eyes fixed on the horizon, knowing that I had reclaimed not only a property, but the very respect and identity that had been stolen from me. Just then, as if to punctuate the moment, a young girl approached and asked in an innocent yet probing tone, "Ms. Hale, how did you know when to fight back?" I paused, a small, serene smile curving my lips. When I had nothing left to lose, I replied, my words echoing like a soft declaration in the cooling air. To those reading my story, thank you. I didn't set out to become a symbol or a headline. I just wanted to reclaim what was stolen: my voice, my dignity, my grandmother's legacy. If you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or told you weren't enough, I hope my journey reminds you that silence is not surrender. Speak even if your voice shakes. Stand even if you're standing alone. And when the time comes, let the truth walk in with you. I didn't win through rage. I won through patience, evidence, and self-worth. You don't need to burn bridges. Sometimes all it takes is owning your name.